Tiny mic 1 2 3. I'm gonna attempt to do my intro in Mandarin. 大家好，我叫 Robin， 来自 This Blog's Neat。如果你会说中文，对不起，我的中文不好，我在用 Duolingo 学习中文。今天我要品尝中国白酒。我朋友 Scott 来自 Different Spirits 给了我一小瓶中国白酒，这是喜酒窖藏1988酱香型白酒。我们开始吧。So I'll admit I know very little about baijiu or baijiu, and that's just because of the information that's available. I feel like it's not super clear and not very readily available to kind of understand the different styles and to understand the different production practices and how that impacts the flavor profile, which is how they determine the style of baijiu. And so because of that, because the information I don't feel like is super readily available, I feel like the spirits category is pretty intimidating. It also doesn't help that like a lot of the information, or at least what's available, the information that's available on bottles of baijiu are in Mandarin. And as you guys heard, my Mandarin is very far from fluent, despite all the time I spend on Duolingo. But I have been curious about learning more about baijiu, the spirits category, and from what I've heard, which is mostly from Scott from Different Spirits, it seems like a really cool category that has some fun production practices that seems like I would be really into. And it also seems like the flavor profiles, at least of some of the bottles that, again, Scott has tried, seem like spirits that I would also be really into. So thankfully, yeah, Scott sent me this bottle so that I can actually dip my toe into the category. And as I said in my intro, the sample he sent is Xijiu Jiaocang. It's 1988. That is the vintage. So Xijiu is the brand name and Jiaocang means cellar aged. So it's kind of the release that they have. 1988 would kind of imply that this was distilled in 1988, or at least that's what you would think. But that's not the case. Apparently it is something like 8 years old and then has some baijiu that's mixed in that was distilled on or before 1988. So I don't know, that kind of feels like 1988 is a bit of a random year that was chosen, but maybe I'm misunderstanding something. Anyways, this is Sauce Aroma Baijiu, and that is one of the 4 major categories of baijiu. It's the most flavorful category to my understanding, and to quote Wikipedia, it has a highly controversial profile. Like it or hate it. Not recommended for beginners, but highly recommended for experienced drinkers. Some consider it as funky. You know I love funky spirits. It's an acquired taste like peaty whiskey. So yeah, that's that sounds great to me. And the way that these funky flavors are developed is through the fermentation practices. So extended fermentation and repeated fermentation, which sounds a little confusing, but I'll do my best to kind of like explain what I understand that to be. But let's like take a step back and kind of understand generally how baijiu is produced. So it's from grains most often, or at least for Sauce Aroma Baijiu, it's sorghum that's predominantly fermented, and the grains are initially steamed, and then to that they add in xijiu, which is essentially their like yeast starter. But it's not just yeast, it's also comprised of molds and bacteria, so that the starches are broken down and those sugars are fermented and converted into alcohol, right? So fermentation. So it's not just for the breakdown of the starch, but there's also fermentation happening, and that's all done with the addition of chu. So it's kind of similar to koji. However, it's a lot more complex in the kind of microbial profile. And it doesn't just break down the starches, it also ferments. So chu is like this dried brick of microbes that have been grown on top of some starchy substance, and then that's mixed in with the steamed grains, of course, once they're cooled down after they're steamed. And once that's mixed, it's allowed to ferment. Now, the fermentation consistency is not kind of what we're accustomed to. It's more like cooked grains rather than liquid, or even like it's not like fermenting on grain where you have a lot of liquid there. It is pretty solid. It's a solid state fermentation, which means that the distillation is also solid state. So after fermentation, they're not taking those grains and then squeezing out all the liquid, all the wine that's fermented, or beer, I guess, depending on how you look at it. But rather, they're loading up those grains into the still, and the still now steams the grains. Those alcohol vapors are able to escape from the grains, travel up to the top of the still where they're condensed and collected, and that's outcomes Baijiu. Now, for Sauce Aroma Baijiu, this process is repeated several times with the same batch of grains. So that means once those grains have gone through fermentation and then the first distillation, they're then taken out of the still. Those spent grains are taken out of the still, and more chu is added to them. So they're restarting the fermentation, and they're fermenting any of the leftover starches, sugars, etc. that are in those grains. And this is repeated over and over and over. For example, for the Xijiu Jiaocang 1988, it's apparently steamed 9 times, it's fermented 8 times, and it is extracted, aka distilled, 7 times through a 165-step process. And this can take over a year. So that is insane. But through this, again, extended fermentation, repeated fermentation, you're essentially just re-fermenting spent grains over and over and over. That builds up a lot of flavor and a lot of complexity. So, what does this taste like? We should dive in. So before I dive in, I want to give a huge shout out to my Patreons. Thank you guys so much for helping to support the channel. You already have my thoughts and my tasting notes about this Baijiu over on Patreon. And if you, the viewer, also like this video, like my channel, and would like to join us on Patreon, I'd be super, super thankful. I've got a link in the description below where you can join us there. But if not, like the normal, like, subscribe, comment, share the video with your friends, watch more of my videos, the normal YouTube things are a great way to help to support the channel. So as you can see, completely clear. And I did say that this was aged. So they're not using oak or any type of wood for the aging. They're aging in clay pots, to my understanding. Okay, so right off the bat, this is giving me like high ester Jamaican rum vibes. Like if a high ester Jamaican rum had a baby with a Tootsie Roll. Yeah. Like there's that nail salon thing and Tootsie Rolls. There's also a like rotting veggie, like garbage veggie thing with lots of Tootsie Rolls. Like this is so weird. I should have warmed up before tasting this. There's chai, but like over steeped chai, completely unsweetened. There's no chai latte, no nothing. This is like over steeped chai. There's peppercorns, charred poblano peppers, chocolate mint. Yeah. There's like a chocolate theme, underlying chocolate theme throughout this. There's also some limes in here. This is super weird. I'm like, I think I'm really enjoying it. Whoa, this is, wow. So different. Initially, it's like tart and sour, like sour gummies that then turn into orange marmalade on top of like extremely dense rye bread. There's caraway, there's peppers. Oh my gosh, there's so much fig jam. Wow. And when I go back to the nose, I'm now getting a lot more chocolate and a lot more fruits. So there's like chocolate covered candied orange. And oh yeah, like some chocolate covered tart cherries. Yeah, chocolate covered cherries. Wow. Yeah, that initial tart thing, I don't think I've ever come across that like right away initial tart thing. That's so weird but interesting. There's a lot of the same flavors again, a lot of those fruits. There's some like chocolate malt, like almost stout like, but just the grains. That fig jam again. There's the chocolate covered cherries, those come through. Chocolate covered like tart cherries comes through. This is really weird, but like in a good way. I really like this. It's so unique. I'm pretty sure Scott gave me one that he knew I would really enjoy, and he did a great job. And I really want to dive more into Baijiu, but I don't know where to go next. So if you have any recommendations for kind of where to go next, or what Baijius I should try next, like, please let me know. Have you tasted any? Do you like any? Do you not like any? Are there some that I should avoid? Yeah, this was really, really fun. Thank you, Scott, so much for sending me the sample. Now, stay tuned because I have 2 other samples from Scott that are not rums. They're not more Baijius. They are more different spirits from Scott. So keep an eye out for those videos to come. And with that, guys, 再见.